only found out that our daughter had passed from the hotel. The fiance did not reach out to us at all.
Y'all, what if everything you were told about Ashley Jana's death was only half the story? Because right now, the internet is spiraling after explosive claims tied to Kevin Gates, claims that he allegedly got access to secret autopsy details that were never meant to be seen. And what those details suggest, it's not just disturbing, it's terrifying. We're talking about a timeline that doesn't add up, a mysterious 11-hour gap that no one can fully explain, and questions that keep getting darker the deeper you look. How does someone go from being alive to a global headline with so many missing pieces in between? And then there's Joe McCann, the fiance who was there, the last person known to be with her, now sitting at the center of growing suspicion online. No accusations confirmed, but too many coincidences for people to ignore. Allegedly, the details being whispered behind the scenes paint a picture that doesn't look like a simple tragedy. Some are saying this could be something far more calculated, something planned, something covered up. Social media is already calling it, "This doesn't feel right." Someone knows more than they're saying. And now, with these new claims surfacing, one question is taking over everything. Was Ashley Jana's death really what we were told? Or is this the moment the truth finally starts breaking through? Because if even part of this is real, this isn't just a story anymore. It's a scandal about to explode.
My money is still on the husband, and not because he's white, but because this was her birthday trip. She went and got a new wig, got her lashes did, nails did, toes did, picked out outfits, and created an itinerary for her birthday. She had no idea that this man was going to propose to her in such a beautiful place like Africa. She would have been ecstatic. It's my birthday and my man is proposing to me? Hell yeah. I do not feel like anywhere in her mind it would have been, it's my birthday, my man is here, he didn't propose to me, this is a great time to just end it all.
Baby, maturing is knowing that a white man can change my life with his money, and he can take it from me with his money, and then he can go get a motherfucking lawyer with his money and get away with that shit.
The version of events the public first received was clean, almost too clean. A young woman travels abroad, a tragic incident occurs, and within hours the narrative settles into something familiar, unclear, unfortunate, but ultimately explainable. That version is now being challenged. At the center of the storm is Ashley Jana, a rising model and influencer whose life, at least online, appeared meticulously curated and relentlessly active. She was working, traveling, building momentum. Then, suddenly, silence. What followed was a wave of speculation fueled by fragments of information that never fully aligned. Now, new claims, unverified but spreading rapidly, are shifting the tone from tragedy to suspicion. According to circulating reports, Kevin Gates has allegedly obtained access to details from an autopsy that were never publicly released. No official confirmation exists, no documentation has been authenticated, but the claims are specific enough to raise serious questions. The language being used is not vague. It points toward inconsistencies that cannot be ignored if proven true. The most unsettling element is not a single detail, but the pattern they form together. First, there is the timeline. Ashley was reportedly discovered under unclear circumstances. What should have triggered immediate clarity instead opened a window of uncertainty, an 11-hour gap between the moment she was found and the moment her family was informed. 11 hours with no complete explanation, no verified sequence of actions, no consistent account of what occurred during that time. In any investigation, gaps create pressure. This gap creates something more. It invites doubt. Then there is the question of condition. The initial description suggested a straightforward scenario, but the alleged details now circulating describe something more complex, observations of physical indicators that do not...
I just spoke to the family of Ashley Robinson. She's the 31-year-old influencer who was on vacation with her fiance celebrating her birthday. He actually proposed on the trip. But something crazy happened. She was having a good time. Her family said she was very excited to be there, shared pictures with the family, FaceTimed them when she was proposed to. But they released a statement saying that Ashley was found unconscious in her villa and was rushed to a local hospital where her death was confirmed out.
Completely aligned with a passive or self-inflicted outcome, mentions of possible struggle, indicators that raise the possibility of external involvement. None of this has been officially confirmed, but the consistency of these claims is what has intensified the reaction. When a narrative begins to fracture, people look for proximity. They look at who was there, That leads directly to Joe McCann. He was reportedly with Ashley during the trip. His account, as referenced in early discussions, positioned the situation within a narrow frame. But as more questions emerge, that frame appears increasingly insufficient. The delay in communication, the lack of immediate transparency, and the evolving online scrutiny have placed him under a spotlight that continues to grow. No formal accusations have been confirmed. No official charges have been announced, yet the weight of suspicion online is escalating, driven not by conclusions, but by unresolved contradictions. Another layer complicates the situation further: the environment itself. The location, the property layout, the reported circumstances of discovery, each element adds context, but not clarity. Analysts, observers, and independent commentators have begun reconstructing possible scenarios, comparing spatial limitations with the alleged sequence of events. Some interpretations suggest improbabilities in the initial explanation. Others point out that without full access to verified evidence, every reconstruction remains speculative. Still, the direction of the conversation is changing. What was once treated as a closed narrative is now being reopened in real time by public pressure and emerging claims. The involvement, alleged or otherwise, of a high-profile name like Kevin Gates has only accelerated that shift. Influence amplifies attention. Attention demands answers, and right now there are more questions than answers. If the reported details are inaccurate, they will eventually collapse under scrutiny. But if even a fraction of them holds weight, then the original version of events may not withstand what comes next, because this is no longer just about what happened. It is about what might have been withheld, and whether the truth, whatever it is, was ever meant to surface at all.
She was starting the next chapter of her life. She called us and FaceTimed us to share with us her travel.
Ashley's mother says she never would have expected that less than a week later, her daughter would be dead. On April 8th, she says Ashley called, saying she and her fiance got into an argument and were moved to separate rooms. The next day, she received another call, this time from her fiance.
He told me that Ashley did something to herself and that she was being taken to the hospital. I said, what happened, when? And he told me it had been 11 hours prior.
Hours later, the luxury resort the couple was staying at called saying that Ashley passed.
As the noise intensifies, the focus shifts from what is being claimed to how those claims intersect with what is already known. Patterns begin to form, not as conclusions, but as pressure points. One of those pressure points is movement. After Ashley was found, accounts indicate she was taken to more than one medical facility. Transfers in critical situations are not unusual, but the sequence here raises questions. Why the relocation? What condition justified the move? And more importantly, what was documented at each stage? Without transparent records, every transfer becomes another layer of uncertainty rather than clarity. Time compounds that uncertainty. The reported delay before her family was informed is not just a number. It's a window where decisions were made, actions were taken, and information was either recorded or lost. In cases where timing is everything, gaps don't just weaken a narrative, they fracture it. Who was present during those hours? Who made the calls? What was observed and what was omitted? The answers to those questions define whether this remains a tragic anomaly or something more deliberate. Attention is also turning toward digital traces. Online activity, or the sudden absence of it, has become a focal point. Observers have pointed to inconsistencies, posts that appear to have been removed, timelines that don't align with reported events, and a general lack of verifiable updates during critical moments. In a case where visibility is expected, silence becomes suspicious. Digital footprints don't disappear without cause. When they do, the question is always the same: who had access and why make changes at that time? Then there's the issue of narrative control. Early statements framed the situation within a narrow interpretation, one that implied a self-contained explanation. But as external voices began dissecting the details, that framing started to break. Independent commentators began mapping out the environment, room dimensions, layout constraints, physical limitations, not to prove a theory, but to test whether the initial explanation could hold under scrutiny. Some reconstructions suggest inconsistencies, others highlight gaps that remain unexplained. None of these reconstructions are definitive, but together they apply pressure to a version of events that now appears incomplete.
Too sure what happened. That's what we're trying to find out. I got 2 emails today from the embassy in Zanzibar that said the investigation is still ongoing. That we have not determined the cause of death yet at all, and the investigation is still ongoing and still pending right now. So there has nothing official has been released. That's what we're trying to find out. We just want answers. We just think it's very odd that our daughter is traveling with Joe and we don't hear anything from Joe. To me, that's very odd. And initial call that she got from Joe was 11 hours after something had transpired in the room. And that's very odd. 11 hours later,
11 hours.
Something had transpired, and Joe just relayed to Yolanda that Ashley was okay and she was stable and she was okay and don't worry about it.
But that she was at the hospital.
At the center of that pressure remains Joe McCann. His proximity to the timeline places him in a position that cannot be ignored. Again, no official finding has assigned responsibility, but proximity in unresolved cases carries weight. Every delay, every inconsistency, every unanswered question circles back to those closest to the event. This is where speculation becomes dangerous and unavoidable. Because when official clarity is absent, the vacuum fills itself. Names begin to surface, motives are suggested, connections are drawn, often without verification. Among those names is Kevin Gates, whose alleged access to undisclosed information has amplified attention far beyond the original scope of the case. Whether that access is real or misrepresented, its impact is undeniable. It has shifted the conversation from quiet speculation to widespread scrutiny, and scrutiny changes outcomes. Authorities, while not publicly confirming a shift in direction, are reportedly aware of the growing pressure. Public interest has a way of accelerating processes that might otherwise remain slow or internal. When a case reaches this level of attention, every detail, no matter how small, becomes significant. Still, there is a line that has not been crossed. No official report has confirmed foul play. No authority has publicly declared this a homicide. The absence of that confirmation is critical. It is the boundary between allegation and fact, between suspicion and proof. Yet the trajectory is clear. Questions are multiplying, not diminishing. Each new claim, each inconsistency, each unexplained detail adds momentum to a narrative that refuses to settle. What was once presented as a closed chapter is now being reopened piece by piece, under a level of scrutiny it was never initially subjected to. And that raises the most important question of all. If the truth was always straightforward, why does it now feel so difficult to pin down? Because in cases like this, complexity is rarely accidental. Sometimes it's the result of incomplete information, and sometimes it's the result of something being deliberately kept out of view.
Alright, hear me out. And maybe this is just me, but I just thought about it because I was driving on my way home. I'd really be ready to cut a nigga off over small. Like the littlest thing, I'd just be turned off. Like, It was mad people in the regular lane, and the express lane was clear as I'm so zooming through that. Pass it. Feet. As a grown man, in 2023, living in the state of Florida, specifically Dade County, Broward County, doing without a sun pass. Like, honestly, you want to just vibe in traffic. Vibe. Could take you 15 minutes to get somewhere. You want to chill out for the next 45 minutes sitting in a regular lane for what? It ain't gonna work with me, baby. It ain't gonna work. I ain't gonna lie. I'm talking about, yo, babe, get over into the express lanes faster, Nah, like, I ain't finna do all that. Drive over them.
By now, the case has moved beyond a single incident and into a contested narrative. What was initially presented as a contained event is being re-examined from multiple angles, each one exposing a different layer of uncertainty. The question is no longer just what happened, but how the story was shaped in the hours and days that followed. Control over information is becoming a central issue. In the earliest phase, details were limited and tightly framed. That is not unusual in sensitive cases. What is unusual is how quickly that framing is now being challenged by fragments that don't align. When a narrative is built on incomplete data, it tends to hold until new variables are introduced. The current wave of claims, regardless of their verification status, has introduced those variables. One of the most discussed elements is the reported condition of the scene. Independent observers who have attempted to reconstruct the environment point out that spatial constraints matter. The layout, the positioning, the physical feasibility of certain actions. These are not abstract concepts. They determine whether an explanation is plausible or strained. Some reconstructions suggest that the initial version of events requires assumptions that are difficult to reconcile with the space itself. Others argue that without official measurements and documentation, any reconstruction remains speculative. What is consistent, however, is the growing discomfort with the simplicity of the original account. That discomfort is being amplified by the continued absence of comprehensive, verifiable documentation. In cases where conclusions are clear, documentation follows. Here, the documentation appears either limited, delayed, or inaccessible to the public. That absence creates a vacuum, and the vacuum is being filled by competing interpretations. At the center of those interpretations is the timeline. Again, not just the 11-hour gap, but the sequence before and after it. Who last had confirmed contact with Ashley Jenae? What communications occurred during the trip? Were there prior indications of distress, conflict, or irregular behavior? These are standard investigative questions, yet in the public domain, they remain largely unanswered. The lack of clarity extends to the role of Joe McCann. His proximity is undisputed. His account, however, has not been fully examined in a way that satisfies the level of scrutiny now surrounding the case. This is not an assertion of wrongdoing. It is a recognition that in unresolved situations, proximity demands examination. Every unanswered question gravitates toward those closest to the event, not because of proof, but because of access. Meanwhile, the alleged involvement of Kevin Gates continues to influence the narrative's trajectory. Whether his reported access to sensitive information is accurate or overstated, it has changed the scale of attention. High-profile association does not validate claims, but it does ensure they are heard. And once heard, they are dissected, repeated, and expanded. The result is a feedback loop where speculation and analysis begin to overlap. This is where the distinction between allegation and evidence becomes critical. At present, there is no publicly confirmed finding that reclassifies the case. No official statement has validated the more severe interpretations now circulating. That absence is not proof of innocence or guilt. It is simply the current state of record. Yet the persistence of unresolved elements is what keeps the case active in the public mind. Because unresolved does not mean concluded. It means incomplete. And incomplete cases tend to evolve. They evolve as new information surfaces, as inconsistencies are identified, and as pressure, public, social, and institutional, forces a closer examination. What is happening now appears to be the early stage of that evolution. The narrative is no longer stable. It is being tested from multiple directions, and each test exposes new points of tension. The outcome remains uncertain. The claims may dissipate if unsupported. They may consolidate if evidence emerges. What is clear is that the initial version of events is no longer sufficient on its own. It exists now as one of several competing explanations, each awaiting validation or dismissal. Until that process is complete, the case remains in a state of suspension. Not resolved, not closed, just waiting between what is known, what is claimed, and what has yet to be proven. This is the point where everything either collapses or explodes. Because if even a fraction of what's being whispered is real, then this isn't just a tragic case anymore. It's a narrative that was built to hold for as long as nobody looked too closely, and now people are looking hard. The timeline doesn't settle. The details don't align. The silence around key moments feels louder than any official statement. You don't get gaps like that without questions. You don't get this many inconsistencies without pressure. And pressure always reveals something. Names are already being dragged into the center of it. Joe McCann is being scrutinized from every angle, not because of confirmed guilt, but because proximity makes him unavoidable in a story that refuses to stay clean. At the same time, the alleged involvement of Kevin Gates has poured fuel on a situation that was already unstable, turning quiet suspicion into a full-blown storm. And then there's Ashley Jenae, the one at the center of it all, whose story now feels less like a conclusion and more like something that was interrupted. People aren't asking politely anymore. They're demanding clarity. They're dissecting every second, every move, every missing piece. Because when a case starts to unravel like this, it rarely stops halfway. So now it comes down to this: was the original story the truth, or just the version that held up long enough to move on? Drop your take below. Say it clearly, because the louder this gets, the harder it becomes for anything to stay buried.